Good morning, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. So, good morning and welcome to the two-day international conference on theorizing anti-casteism organized by the Department of English, Presidency University, Kolkata. My name is Barishan Ray. I am a second-year undergraduate student at the Department of English, Presidency University. This is parallel session number 15 titled Case Studies from History. This session is being chaired by Dr. Kumar Barman. Dr. Kumar Barman is Professor of History at Jadavpur University, Kolkata. He is the author of 11 books and monographs and 2 edited volumes, 40 articles in referred journals, and 20 chapters in published in edited volumes. His research areas include tribal and Dalit studies, social and political history of colonial and post-colonial India, human rights, and environmental history. Professor Barman is a reputed anti-caste scholar from Bengal and has made substantial contribution to the caste question in Bengal. Over to you, sir. Professor Barman, are you there?
Actually, my audio is not working. My audio is not working, so I will have to join from mobile. That is from cell phone.
Okay,
So what you have said that I could not listen to. Anyway, let me try once again.
okay, sir. We'll wait.
Just hold on one minute.
Yes.
Now I am audible.
Yes, sir, but there are a lot of echoes. Can you?
No, it will be stop. It will stop.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Now I think it is all right. No.
Yes, sir. So, sir,
So yes.
should I repeat what I said?
Yeah.
Okay, sir. Uh, So Professor Barman could not hear me the last time, so I'm repeating it again. Uh, I'm Bhurishan Rai. I'm an undergraduate student at the Department of English, Presidency University, and welcome everyone to the two-day international conference organized by the department on theorizing anti-casteism. So this session is titled this is session number 15, and it is titled Case Studies from History, and it is being chaired by Dr. Kumar Barman. Dr. Kumar Barman is Professor of History at Jadavpur University, Kolkata. He is the author of 11 books and monographs and 2 edited volumes, 40 articles in referred journals, and 20 chapters published in edited volumes. His research areas include tribal and Dalit studies, social and political history of colonial and post-colonial India, human rights, and environmental history. Professor Barman is a reputed anti-caste scholar from Bengal and has made substantial contribution to the caste question in Bengal. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Megamala, and very good morning to all of you. All of you are acquainted with this seminar that it is on the theorizing anti-casteism, which is an important aspect of our Indian history. And in this session, we have basically 4 papers, and these papers are from different corners of our Indian subcontinent or India. And some of them are related to the colonial part, and one paper is on the present day, that is the post-colonial history. So before the beginning of the session, let me speak a few words regarding the participants and the paper presenters. In this session, we have 4 papers. The first paper that will be delivered by Mr. Venna Abhilash. Uh, I think he is here. He is a PhD scholar, Center for Historical Studies, Jawaharlal University, New Delhi. Then there is another paper by Mr. Akshay Sawant, PhD scholar of Sociology, IIT Bombay from Maharashtra. Then another paper by Dr. Ashish Kumar. He is an assistant professor of history, Punjab University, Chandigarh. Then another paper by Miss Sephora George. She's a PhD scholar from the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Kanpur. So we have basically four papers from four corners: IIT Kanpur, IIT Bombay, Chandigarh University, and JNU. So from four different institutions, we'll get four papers. So let me introduce these papers before the beginning of the session. And the standard norms of this seminar is that each paper presenter will get 20 minutes for paper presentation, and we'll take the papers collectively. That is, for 80 minutes, the papers will be presented, and the next 25 minutes we'll have discussion, including the comments of the chairperson. So that is the rules as suggested by the Presidency University Authority for conducting the session. So let me introduce the papers. So all of you know that caste has been an integral part of our Indian civilization since the very beginning of settled human civilization in Indian subcontinent, and it began to evolve in different parts of the subcontinent and got different forms. There was the growth of the intercaste marriage, and that led to the growth of uncountable numbers of subcastes. At the same time, the growth of different kind of profession, that is economic evolution and the social evolution, had created a kind of complex caste system in India. And this complex caste system again had produced a kind of social oppression which is still in existence in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, as well as Nepal and other countries of the world. So, in the colonial part, though in the ancient period, you will find a lot of references or the incidents which were the examples of anti-caste movement, and we can often place the Jainism, Buddhism as the inspiring incident or the introduction for anti-caste movement in India. But you'll find in later on these religious groups or the ideologies had also engulfed by the caste system in India. So the caste is an important part of our Indian civilization, and we have the trend of anti-caste movement since the 6th century BCE. So since the 6th century BCE to till date, that is, you can say 2,500 years, we are experiencing the anti-caste movement. In spite of that, caste system is still there, untouchability is still there in different forms, the caste oppression is still there, casteism is still there. So how can we understand this history? For that, we have different papers, particularly relating to the colonial part. In the colonial part, you'll find that a noticeable change has taken place because of the growth of colonial mode of administration that had contributed to the growth of Western education, which has inspired many intellectuals belonging to the lower caste communities to raise voice against the oppressive behavior or the phenomenon of casteism in Indian subcontinent. So here today we'll get first papers, that is relating to the contesting Hindu identity, that is Ambedkar's Yeola Conference and Youth League of Ambedkarites in the princely state of Hyderabad. So all of you know that Ambedkar is an important figure of our Indian history. Not only as the father of Indian Constitution, he was one of the greatest leader of colonial India and had contributed a lot of writings in different on different subjects. Suppose in Yeola conference, he wrote that I am born as an untouchable Hindu within the Hindu fold, but I will not continue it. So that had a kind of impact, not only in Maharashtra and the directly British ruled parts, it had its influence in the Nizam Shahi, that is the state ruled by Nizam of Hyderabad. So Mr. Venna Abhilash will speak on it. Then caste of anti-casteism, critique of Maratha Seva Sangh. that will be spoken by Mr. Akshay Sawant, Maratha Seva Sangh. That is an important aspect of Maratha society, how it is related to the anti-casteism in the post-colonial period, particularly in the last quarter of the 20th century and the present century. He will speak on it. Then another important paper that is considered to be the source of all kind of caste disparity in India, that is Manusmriti. And against the burning Manu, the burning of Manusmriti, that is an important aspect of the 1920s. And Manusmriti was publicly burned. How it is considered to be a source of discrimination, and how Manusmriti was opposed by the Dalits, that will be spoken by Dr. Ashish Kumar. Then we have another important paper here today that will be presented by Ms. Sephora Jose. That is the presentation of Dalit historiography with a new perspective that is very important. Perhaps you know that in the 1990s, in a volume of the Subaltern Studies, in Subaltern Studies volume 9, uh, Kanchailia has written a very excellent article that the Dalit Bahujan alternative in historiography. He has criticized the subaltern historiography and other historical discourses because these discourses did not highlight the Dalit historiography. So he was talking about the possibility of the construction of an alternative Dalit discourse in for the Dalits in India, and Ms. Sephora Jose will speak on it with a new alternative, particularly taking the cases from Kerala, that is the Dravida movement in Kerala, Adi Dravida movement in Kerala, and she will present the trends of the society and how their belief system and the myths are related to the alternative historical study or discourse that will be presented by her. So now, without talking much, I will now invite uh, Mr. Venna Abhilash. He's a PhD research scholar from the Center for Historical Studies, JNU, New Delhi, and you will get 20 minutes for the presentation. And after the presentation is over, all the presentation, we'll have the discussion. So, Abhilash, you are here.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Okay, okay.
Am
Now,
I audible to everyone?
yes, yes, you are audible.
Yes, sir. Can I start?
Yes, yes. You can start.
Good morning to everyone. I'm Abhilash. I'm a PhD research scholar at Center for Historical Studies, JNU. And today I'll be presenting the paper titled Contesting Hindu Identity, Ambedkar's Yeola Declaration and Youth League of Ambedkarites in the Princely State of Hyderabad. And the time period in which I cover this topic is from 1935 to 1939. Ambedkar's iconic call to exit the Hindu fold in October 1935 heralded the radical shift within the Dalit movement of Hyderabad. This radical line entailed a fundamental rejection of the socio-cultural position within Hinduism and promoted conversion to or starting a non-Hindu religion as the historic way forward. Religious conversion was conceived as a first step towards securing political representation, which is essential for advancing the civic and economic rights of Dalits. Ambedkar made the question of untouchability a political problem rather than a socio-religious problem to be solved by gradual reform. The momentous significance of this conversion call could be gauged by the headline Ambedkar's bomb in the Telugu nationalist newspaper, the Golconda Patrika. This critical stance from 1935 propelled Dalit politics in Hyderabad. They emphasized the need to fashion an autonomous cultural identity and an independent political action from caste Hindus and their organizations to achieve social, economic, and political freedom. Now, this shift triggered other political actors in the political landscape of Hyderabad. It set into motion the Tabligh campaign, which unleashed new dynamics in the politics of Hyderabad. Therefore, this paper discusses the three-way relationship between the principal actors like the Youth League of Ambedkarites, the Hindu social reformers, and the principal Muslim party, the Anjumani Ittihadul Muslimin, for the contestation it generated on the cultural identity of Dalits. Now, I aim to address two questions that are related to this paper. I aim to address only two questions, which are, what was the process by which this contestation occurred, or the events through which they contested the Hindu identity? Second, what was the impact of this contestation on the larger politics of these princely states? And for this, first I take up the profound intervention made by the new radical leadership in the domain of popular culture. But before I go into this contestation, I would like to give a brief background to how the YLA was formed, by how the Youth League of Ambedkarites, from here on I call it YLA, how the YLA was formed, and how, due to the synergy between the YLA and Ambedkar politics, it facilitated their participation in the historic Bombay Mahar Conference held in June 1936. Now, the YLA was formed in May 1936, and it immediately prepared a report on conversion, which made a case for conversion of 5,000 Dalits from the Hindu fold. And this immediately created a flutter in caste Hindu circles. Now, due to this report and the basic yoking of the YLA with the Ambedkarite politics, Ambedkar invited the leader of the YLA, B.S. Venkat Rao, to preside at the historic Bombay Mahar Conference in 1936. Now, two resolutions at this conference are very important for Hyderabad politics, which is, one, they passed a resolution. The first resolution was to move the Dalit masses away from the Hindu fold. Second, also to remove the Dalit masses away from the influence of Hindu social reformers. Now, while this meeting took place in June 1936, the resolutions were immediately implemented the next month in July, where the YLA gave a historic call to Dalit masses to withdraw from the highly popular Bonalu festival, which is held every year in July. Now, due to this call given by the YLA, Dalit masses withdrew en masse from the festival in the twin cities of Hyderabad and Secunderabad. Now, by 1938, they abandoned all the principal temples of Secunderabad, and due to this, the withdrawal of Dalit masses from this highly popular Bonalu festival has immense implications for it actually affected the larger project of Brahmanization of important festivals, Hindu social reformers. Now, Hindu social reformers tried to replace animal sacrifices with Brahminical practices like Sattvic Puja, and also with this withdrawal of Dalit masses, they also questioned the renaming of the local mother goddesses like Poshamma, Maisamma into the Brahminic Mahakali. So, due to this ideological challenge, this ideological challenge from the radical shift in the Dalit movement invited the counter reaction of Hindu social reformers, who immediately formed an umbrella organization called Down with Ambedkarism cum Sanatanism League. So, hence the radical shift and this withdrawal unsettled the plans of the Hindu social reformers to impose Brahminical practice in subaltern temples and reproduce Brahminical ideology through subaltern festivals. Hence, this attempt to counter the Ambedkarite politics in 1936 was spoiled by the Secretary of Youth League of Ambedkarites, P.R. Venkateswamy, who went and not only disrupted the meeting but also dispersed it, the meeting of the Down with Ambedkarism cum Sanatanism League. And this event of Dalit defiance quickly became an item of political discussion in the markets of Secunderabad city. The second contestation, apart from Hindu social reformers, was when a Dalit man prosecuted the topmost Congress leader called Vaman Nayak and other Hindu leaders for theft. Now, this case assumes larger significance because it indicated that the Dalit movement parted ways with the Hyderabad Congress circles. Now, both these events, one, the clash with Hindu social reformers, and one, prosecuting the topmost Congress leaders in Hyderabad, shows that the radical Dalit movement contested the 3-decade-old reformist compact that existed between Dalit leadership and Hindu social reformers from 1906 to 1935. Second, by prosecuting Congress leaders, it questioned the larger ideological framework of Gandhian nationalism that existed from 1920 to 1935. Dalit leadership therefore no longer saw promise in the ideological and political frameworks of Hindu social reform and Gandhian nationalism from 1935. Apart from this intervention in popular culture, the Dalit masses responded to the call given by the YLA and converted to Islam and Christianity in a mass way. And this can be shown through the next section I'll deal with, which is Dalit mass conversions and the Tabligh campaign. Now, the leader of the Muslim party, Nawab Bahadur Jang, quickly noted the radical potential in Ambedkar's Yeola declaration and initiated the Tabligh campaign immediately after it. He was, according to Padmanja Naidu, the Congress leader from Hyderabad, the Tabligh campaign produced a staggering 18,000 converts in the rural districts of Hyderabad in just 3 years. Now, Dalit conversions to Christianity was even more, given the long tradition of conversion to Christianity in this princely state. And the Methodist Episcopal Church reports 10,000 conversions for the year 1938 alone. And in terms of the geographical spread, the campaign was highly successful in the Telangana region, little less in the Marathwada and Kannada regions. And this shows that the scale of these numbers shows the intensity of Dalit defiance, and they contained a sharp cultural critique and contested relationship of exploitation and power hierarchies in village society. The low status of Dalits in Hindu religion enabled the extraction of forced labor from them. Hence, conversion of Dalits in the agrarian countryside would result in material, social, and political loss for landed groups. Hence, conversion to Islam and Christianity would increase the social standing and delegitimize demands for free labor. Fearing the loss of free labor provided by the Dalit masses and loss of obviously political power, landlords opposed the Tabligh campaign and Christian mission efforts amongst Dalits. This opposition shows that the movement away from the Hindu fold, initiated by the Youth League of Ambedkarites, had the potential to unsettle the labor regime in this princely state. As rightly envisaged by Ambedkarite politics, the cultural identity of Dalits was at the root of the exploitative labor regime in Hyderabad. The scale of conversions also highlights the ideological sync between the Dalit masses and their leadership. It activated the Dalit masses in Hyderabad, in the villages of Hyderabad, in an unprecedented manner. Due to its mass appeal, the movement away from the Hindu fold stitched anti-caste politics firmly into the actions of other organizations. Here we have in mind, especially example is the actions of the proselytizing organization, which is the Anjumani Tablighul Islam. Here one example is very illuminating, eliminates the argument I just made, which is the Tabligh propagandists try to secure the civic rights of Dalits in the town of Khammam in Telangana by enabling them to access water from a caste Hindu well. And when the Sanatanis, who saw this act as a sacrilege, came to assault Dalits, the Tabligh propagandists defended them and also said that they'll also enable Dalits to draw water from the well of caste Hindus from other parts of Khammam as well. So this event shows that an anti-caste vision and a will to contest the adversaries of Dalits were stitched solidly into the Tabligh campaign. Now, because of this series of contestations with the Hindu social reformers, Hyderabad Congress leaders, and the Tabligh campaign, the impact on the overall politics of the princely state has to be assessed. Now, this historical phenomena in Hyderabad, which was created by Ambedkar's Yeola declaration, produced three important outcomes. One was the realignment which happened within the caste Hindu organizations themselves in order to counteract this Ambedkarite challenge. Now here, the caste Hindu nationalist organizations tried to stem the fluidity induced by the Ambedkarite shift in the politics of this princely state. The Hyderabad State Congress leader, Mudumulla Narsingh Rao, in an essay in the Golconda Patrika, expressed serious Brahminical anxieties over Hindu demography. He commented that if conversions continue at this pace, the Hindu religion would eventually meet the fate of merging with other religions due to a lack of population numbers. Such anxieties were taken seriously by the three nationalist organizations, the Harijan Sevak Sangh, Andhra Mahasabha, and the Arya Samaj. The facile differences between the conservatives or Sanatanists on one hand and the reformers on the other within the Harijan Sevak Sangh and the Andhra Mahasabha collapsed to fashion a united response to the two untouchable mass conversions. The Andhra Mahasabha and the Harijan Sevak Sangh provided tactical shift to the activities, to the Shuddhi activities or Shuddhi or reconversion activities of the Arya Samaj in the agrarian countryside. Hence, so with the initiation of the Shuddhi program by the Arya Samaj and the Tabligh campaign already underway among the Dalit masses, the both interacted to produce to communalize the polity and society of Hyderabad from 1936, which directly led to the first mass event in Hyderabad state called the Hyderabad Satyagraha in 1938-39. Now, the second most important outcome is with respect to the Dalit movement itself, which is the movement away from the Hindu fold contributed to the emergence of Dalits as an independent political community. Now, B.S. Venkatrao, the president of the YLA, it could be seen in two instances. One, when he presented an address of the on behalf of Dalits to the Nizam to recognize Dalits as an independent political community in the state. YLA and other organizations preceding the radical shift, even the YLA was a purely cultural organization, but it opened the door to political assertion. But it is seen from the fact that the YLA, the Adi Hindu Social Service League, and whatever or other organizations came before the YLA were not political organizations because they did not require the permission from the Nizam state to start an organization. But in B.S. Venkatrao sought the permission from the Nizam's government to establish the first political organization called the Hyderabad State Depressed Classes Association in 1938. Hence, the YLA was renamed as the Hyderabad State Depressed Classes Association, and it was the first political organization of the Dalits, which was not subject to what Eleanor Zilliot called as the broker model of politics instituted by the Hindu social reformers in the 1920s. And it was the need to transform the YLA into the Hyderabad State Depressed Classes Association was to meet the emergent threat from the consolidation of caste Hindu nationalists and to put forth a wider political mandate than the YLA. And the third historical outcome was the immense impact or how Ambedkarite politics breathed life into the politics of minority and widened the space of minority politics in Hyderabad from 1935 onwards. This can be seen from a comparison of the actions of the Anjuman-e-Ittihad al-Muslimin in 1932, that was before Ambedkar's Yeola declaration, and from 1935 onwards, when the Tabligh campaign it launched was a roaring success. Now, here in 1932, the Anjuman-e-Ittihad al-Muslimin recognized the dissension caused in the Hindu camp due to the Pune Pact in 1932. Muslim parties contested the claim of the All India Hindu Mahasabha that Hindus comprised 85% of the population in Hyderabad and asserted that Dalits were not part of the Hindu fold. The Anjuman intended to exploit the fluidity introduced by Dalit dissent in 1932, and it started in this time period itself. Though it initiated a campaign of conversion in 1932, it was not a success because the Islamic missionary activities were not successful because they were unable to connect with the Dalit and non-Dalit masses through its conversion campaign because of the lack of involvement of the Dalit movement from 1935 in the conversion campaign. But it reaped rich dividends from 1936, shows the critical role of Ambedkar politics in giving Muslim politics a mass appeal. Hence, the activation of Dalits as a political minority in the body politic of Hyderabad reinforced the similar political status of Muslims through the Tabligh campaign. Other minorities like the Lingayats and Sikhs also joined this chorus of political opposition to caste Hindu nationalist politics. The Hyderabad People's Convention of 1937 was a fruit of this advancement of minority political space by Ambedkar politics.
So thank you. I think you have completed your presentation.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it is an excellent paper on the uh, protest of the Dalits of Hyderabad being influenced or induced by the Yeola conference of Ambedkar. The Dalits of Hyderabad had started their conversion to Christianity and Islam, and how it had contributed to the growth of Dalit consciousness in that state, that has been presented by uh, Venna Abhilash. We'll have more question answer on this after the end of the entire presentation. Now I'll invite Mr. Akshay Sawant. Sorry, uh, yes, Akshay Sawant to present his paper on caste of anti-casteism, critique of Maratha Seva Sangh. Akshay Sawant is a PhD scholar of sociology from Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, IIT Bombay, and he will speak on the Maratha Seva Sangh, which is a movement of the late 20th century or the post-colonial part. Now it is the turn of Mr. Akshay Sawant, and kindly follow the time period limit, that is 20 minutes. Akshay.
Thank you, Professor, for the introduction, and thank you, organizers, for giving me this opportunity. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, thank you. My paper is more of a descriptive, so I will get directly to the content of it. Title, as already said, is Caste of Anti-casteism, Critique of Maratha Seva Sangh. Two opposing but related processes are shaping caste in the contemporary. On the one hand, initiatives are being made to form caste groups and they redraw caste boundaries. The discovery of a caste as a resource, on the other hand, has resulted in growth of a single caste organizations. These caste organizations emerged in the modern setup, mainly serving mobilizational and political functions. This paper will discuss one such caste organization, Maratha Seva Sanghs, henceforth will be called as MSS. Maratha Seva Sangh's works and discourse on caste and offer an anti-caste critique. In what follows, first I will contextualize the coming of Maratha caste organizations and problematize MSS works and discourse on caste. Based on the fieldwork and published material by MSS, I will demonstrate that MSS discourse on caste remains anti-Brahmin and fails to be anti-Brahmanic. It further promotes the Maratha pride and works for caste upliftment. Comparing with the ideas of Ambedkar and Phule, whose line MSS claims to work on, I explore the pitfalls in MSS discursive strategies. In demonstrating so, at the end, I will comment on question of anti-caste thought and movement in the post-Mandal era. The context. A well-known political economy narrative tells us that Maratha's dominance of the 1960s came from their land ownership, numerical strength, control over cooperative sugar factories and banks, educational institutions, agro-industries, and over-representation in politics. The 60s started with the formation of the Maharashtra state, marking the mood of optimism for the Marathas. Maratha caste was consolidated and reaped political benefits. With cooperatives, hold over local political representation, and Green Revolution, the class contradictions within Marathas started widening. By the 1980s, mill workers lost their jobs, and the dependence of the agriculturalists on the market for seeds, equipments, fertilizers, and the trade of produce material increased, reducing their profit, and things started changing. The nature of the state from the welfare slowly changed to market, and the Maratha caste began to witness an economic decline. It was coupled with the rise of radical organization, Dalit Panther. Upwardly mobile Dalits claiming for the university to be named after Babasaheb Ambedkar, popularly known as Namantar movement, challenged Marathas' feudal masculinity. The Mandal movement heightened this crisis for Marathas, as other Shudra castes were deemed to get benefits. Maratha is an internally fractured identity. There are many subcastes, as generally is the case with the caste. These internal fractions responded differently to the Mandal movement. Ruling class Marathas, such as Deshmukhs and Patils, who considered themselves Kshatriya, Shannaukul, the 96 pure clans, ridiculed the reservations and considered it lowly to demand it, whereas non-ruling class Kundis of Vidarbha and Konkan claimed and got reservations under the OBC category. Kunbis for long have been looked down upon by the Marathas, yet used for political representation under the Maratha identity. They were merely considered for marriage alliances. They were rarely considered for marriage alliances. Marathas, for an extended period, have enjoyed numerical dominance in Maharashtra. This numerical dominance has resulted in electoral dominance and helped them maintain political and social power. Kunbis getting reservation under the OBC category had challenged this cohesion, and the number game started playing differently. In 1990s, the agrarian crisis intensified, the education became costlier and out of reach for many. With the globalization, nature of jobs shifted from manufacturing to the service sector, leaving a large section of rural Marathas unfit for the new jobs due to lacking required skills. At the political level, the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment with that, a reservation was applied in local body elections. Internal fractions, mainly between Kunbis and Marathas, were used by various political parties to broaden their base, resulting in no easy translation of numbers of Marathas into political seats. While aristocratic Marathas were in the position to capitalize on changed conditions, the discontent of Kunbi and backward Marathas continued to grow. Within this context of deepening economic crisis and increasing internal discontent, new wave of Maratha caste organizations sprang. These Maratha organizations can be split into two camps. While both emphasize Marathaness to maintain their control, Maratha Mahasangh embraced the Hindutva line, whereas MSS revived its association with the non-Brahmin movement of early 20th century. It is the analysis of its ideology now we turn. Ideological line of MSS. Riding on the anxieties and fear of loss, middle caste Marathas started MSS. It began as an organization of government servants working with the idea of payback to the society. The impulse for founding the organization was Budti hai jana na dekhve dola. That is, we cannot see the drowning people with our eyes. They began with the intent of mobilizing and inducing illiterate poor Maratha, Patil, Deshmukh, and Rajput under the MSS. At times, they have used a broader definition of Maratha while mobilizing other caste members. The Maratha identity was a broader historical category that was more flexible in terms of description of caste boundaries. This flexibility allowed Marathas to claim that Maratha meant, more in foolish terms, anyone from Maratha to Mahar other than Brahmin. There is a long-standing feud between non-Brahmins and Brahmins predating colonialism. Earlier, this feud was happening in the guise of Brahmin versus Shudra. One strand of this feud has been fought on the ritual status. A dominant ideological line comes from Maratha aristocrats who have aspired for Kshatriya status. The 17th century Maratha ruler Shivaji has claimed for Kshatriya status. Brahmins of the region denied his coronation ceremony, considered him Shudra. New chapters have been added to that feud since the early 20th century. Shahu was denied Vedic ritual rites, terming him and thereby to all the Marathas as Shudra. It resulted in a bitter fight between Marathas and Brahmins known as the Vedokta controversy. This controversy became a defining feature of Maharashtra's later politics and the Maratha identity formation. The non-Brahmin movement spread the caste uplifting sentiment that we are not Shudras but Kshatriya in various middle castes. The socio-economic misery among the non-Brahmins against the prosperity of Brahmins and moneylenders, along with the continued efforts of Satyashodak, exposed the Brahmin exploitation and hypocrisy. The non-Brahmin movement of the early 20th century, though having interesting interventions in developing anti-caste thoughts, largely remained a movement of caste upliftment. In the 1930s, when non-Brahmin leaders were entering Congress, Vittal Ramji Shinde wrote a Bahujan Paksha manifesto that called for Bahujanwadi politics, which was significantly different than the non-Brahmin politics. As per his manifesto, progressive amongst any caste could be a member of the party, and Brahmanical of any caste will not be granted membership. His brand of politics did not get the support. When the Maharashtra formation happened, Y.B. Chavan, Maratha from a humble background, became the chief minister of the new state. He carefully crafted Maratha dominance inside the Congress party by doing politics of number, using the Bahujan idioms. The combination of non-Brahmin movement ideology and the Bahujan politics of Chavan became the ideological line of MSS. Mirroring RSS organizational structure, they started expanding their organization from a government servant base to more mass base. 32 different wings were formed under MSS, including the youth wing Sambhaji Brigade and women's wing Jizau Brigade. Members of MSS claim that The idea was to propagate the thoughts of Bahujan leaders like Phule, Shahu, and Ambedkar, which Marathas could not allow to enter their life easily. It is indeed a daunting task, as Marathas have enormous caste pride, and Kshatriyization and Hindutvaization are the two processes prominent in Marathas. They did expand beyond the non-Brahmin movement. Since the 1990s, they have been spreading their ideology via various programs and events, having significant interventions in the institutionalization of their ideas as well. The organization came to prominence around 2004-2005 because of two events. One is the declaration of a new religion, parting its ways from Hinduism. With this, they went beyond the non-Brahmin movements, setting up of Chhatra Jagadguru Peeth in 1917, in which they have replaced Brahmin priests with Kshatriya priests. In their zeal to challenge the Brahmin dominance, they came up with a new religion named Shivdharma. Lakhs of people took a public oath at Syndicate Raja, the birthplace of Shivaji Maharaj's mother, Jizabai, to join Shivdharma. Their idea was to have a religion true to the tastes of happiness, prosperity, and peace, which rejects Brahmins' godlike position. They claim Shivdharma does not enslave Bahujan and calls for brotherhood among Bahujans. Shivdharma propagates that Bahujans are India's actual inhabitants, and today's Hinduism is not a true religion. Rather, true religion has to be based on ancient Sindhuism, whose reincarnation is Shivdharma. It calls for a revolt against Hinduism, re-establishment of original Hindu culture, throwing away of slaves' pride planted in our mind, and restoring the pride of place, pride of past heroes, to seek inspiration for nation building from Bahujan luminaries. The coming of Shivdharma was welcomed by many. Many rituals were changed. Shiva, that is marriage type, was propagated. Brahmin was removed from marriage ceremony and democratized for other castes. Widow marriages was allowed for equality, and equality for the upbringing of children was preached. Many such practices propounded by Shivdharma involve the appropriation of Bahujan culture for cohesive reorganization and unification of Maratha caste and Bahujans. Though they received mass support, many Marathas criticized heavily and questioned the need for the new religion. Over the period, MSS responded by diluting the principles of Shivdharma to the extent that many who have converted to its practice, they practice now most of the Hindu religious rituals, including calling Brahmins for their rituals at home. They termed Hinduism as a religion that enslaves, but the examples they gave largely remained that of Kshatriya. They failed to get Marathas out of the Kshatriya minds. Even though they claim it is a long and slow process, the principles and the issues they are taking up or avoiding suggest that it is unlikely to happen. Beyond specific ritual changes in the marriage and reducing the significance of Brahmin in conducting rituals, Shivdharma failed to give major cultural critique of Brahminical ideology. They never made concrete mobilization against the cultural appropriation of various gods and goddesses by the Brahminical ideology. Marks a discontent between the Bahujans' everyday cultural practices and the MSS activities, giving an easy go for Brahminical ideas to take hold. They never engaged with the Ambedkar's reorganizing of the culture. For instance, why he had opposed Ram and Krishna in the riddles of Hinduism. Instead, MSS considered them as essential Bahujan icons without giving any proper response to Ambedkar's criticism. Going a step backward where Ambedkar has taken us, it is criticism and cultural reorganizing in the form of Navayana Buddhism. Irrespective of dilution of principles and allowing Brahmin traditions to continue, a few questions becomes pertinent, which requires a further investigation. What is the rationale behind Shivdharma when there is an option of Navayana Buddhism? What ethics and morals this religion teaches, which can be helpful for the project of annihilation of caste? Next section is rewriting history, reclaiming present. The other incident which happened in 2004-2005 was the attack on Bhandarkar Institute. Reacting to the passages defaming Jizabai in James Lane book, Shivaji, Hindu King in Islamic India, Sambhaji Brigade attacked Bhandarkar Institute. For a long time, they claimed that Brahmins were distorting history to rule over Bahujans. Acknowledgements in the book had mentioned that Bhandarkar Institute and many Bahujans working in it provided the research material for the book. Brigade saw this as cultural terrorism by Brahmins. James Lane controversy inaugurated new inquiries into the history of history writing, claiming the truthful past. MS sentiment contribution, MS's significant contribution in the progressive politics has been the rewriting of the history. They have incessantly written on Shivaji, Sambhaji, and Maratha polity to rescue them from being turned against Muslims and for the protectors of cows and Brahmins. This, in some ways, has helped in keeping a tab on Hindu-Muslim conflicts and reducing Maratha youth's participation in it. However, their focus on the history largely remained on the 17th century Maratha rule, subtly painting Maratha rulers as protectors of Bahujans. It helped them claim their place as the leaders in fight against the Brahmins. They failed to awaken the masses, and even within their rank, for the caste of annihilation project. In opposition to the politics of Hindutva and Brahmin historians, MSS transformed the figure of Jijabai as central to Maratha mobilization. They attempted to rewrite imaginations about Jijabai, establishing her as a political mentor of Shivaji, who inspired the feeling of Swarajya in him. They rallied support around her using Rath Yatras, public conferences, events, talks, and prominently constructing Jijau Srushti in Sindhkhed Raja. Their vision was to bring Jijabai beyond the mother figure and construct her as an independent woman with courage, integrity, and vision for the Swarajya. In Jijau Srushti, they installed a giant standing statue of her and a small Shivaji statue. They were spreading the message that Jijabai is indeed an idol to follow. Though they attempted to create Jijabai as an idol to learn from, the central quality of her remained to be making of Shivaji. Motherhood was highlighted in different interpretation of her life. MSS was no exception. She was considered an ideal mother who taught Shivaji the right values and inspired him to fight the opposition of people by Muslim rulers and Brahmin dominance. Powerful articulation of her as a brave wife also remained in their articulation, though they have downplayed it considerably. The figure of Jizabai, carefully crafted as Garandas Bai, a respected woman, has helped MSS in two ways. The figure of Jizabai, used as a mother, helped contain women into a community fold, maintaining the patriarchal boundaries of caste. The other is the regional claim. The life and career of Shivaji has mainly been in contemporary Western Maharashtra. The MSS influential members are from Vidarbha and Marathwada. It was challenging to claim over Shivaji as there were many takers from Western Maharashtra. In Jizabai, they found a perfect answer where they can claim spatial prominence in Vidarbha and Marathwada. We have seen that MSS come in a specific context, one of which was the problem of globalization on the agrarian and subsequent shift in the nature of work. Though this has remained one of the reasons behind their formation, they failed to understand the issue of capitalism. Notwithstanding the foolish criticism of Chetji and Bhatji, that is moneylender and a Brahmin, and Ambedkar's reformulation against capitalism and Brahmanism, MSS has focused only on Bhatji, that is Brahmins. MSS has failed to understand the close-knitted working of caste and capitalism. It also has a dubious philosophy. In their portrayal, MSS shows that Marathas are the ruling caste, and like a big brother, they have always looked up after the other caste below them. Keeping the upper hand with Marathas gives a sense of charity. Ambedkar urged that social suffering caused by caste could not be addressed merely through karuna, let alone charity. Even though it is an important virtue, that is karuna is important virtue, but though it is an important virtue, but through the practice of fellow feeling of fraternity. Minadanda contends that equality, freedom, and fraternity are essential principles. In all these three principles, MSS falls short. They prefer Marathas over other caste members, irrespective of whom that Maratha is, limiting the concept of equality within the bounds of Marathas and not extending it to all people, making their project of caste upliftment and progress of Marathas than the annihilation of caste. In their construction of the discourse, they use other in the form of Brahmins as uniting factor. They do not undertake the particularism of Dalit identity. Due to such ideological bankruptcy, they have rallied to dilute the SCST Atrocity Act. They pinpoint that the act is misused, arguing that most of the cases are false. They also fail to give any moral and affirmative criticism of Brahminical practices. It also has issues of representation. Though MSS uses Bahujan idioms and symbolism, its organized structure hardly gives space to non-Marathas. Non-Marathas have been seen more as followers and Marathas as the leaders. It is the consciousness of Marathas being rulers, and being Janta Raja, benevolent king, they practice, boosting the Maratha pride. They promote giving work to Marathas in their public and private programs. The Marathanis becomes centralizing logic. MSS remains uncritical of the Brahminical within Marathas. Their slogan says, Maratha Titkwa Melevava, Gun Dosha Saha Swikarava. Bring all the Marathas together, accept them with their defects. It also has a distinction within the public and private, which raises the question of gender. In ideological discourse of MSS, the household remains least talked about. Women's role in MSS ideology has been seen more as guardians of organizations, thoughts whose primary responsibility has to cultivate those thoughts in children. Women mainly were put in Jizau Brigade rather than having them in the ranks of all the wings of MSS, restricting them to only the women question. MSS articulates a larger framework for the women's question to be followed by the Jizau Brigade.
Akshay, please go to your concluding part.
Okay. This paper demonstrates that MSS discourse on caste remains anti-Brahmin and fails to be anti-Brahminical. It further promotes the Maratha pride and works for caste upliftment. The post-Mandal conditions, particularly for articulating the non-Brahmin line, pose an additional difficulty in the form of governmental categorization. The neo-non-Brahmin movement, if we call so, for MSS, fails to resolve the question of Bahujan, who they are, how they can come together, and how to handle the categorization of OBC. This question remains unanswered. Hindutva ideology seems to have resolved that question by projecting Muslims as an external other, uniting even if momentarily across castes. This question remains unresolved for the anti-caste movement as well. It is not the making of other as an enemy, be it a Brahmin or something else, that will take us out of this condition. There is a need to construct a transformative affirmative identity. Ambedkar's idea of fraternity has the potential to become grounding for such an identity. Thank you.
Thank you, Akshay, for your presentation on the past of anti-casteism, critique of Maratha Seva Sangha or MSS. So this paper is to some extent different than the history of the colonial part. In Maharashtra, there were certain new trends in the post-colonial period. Firstly, there was the growth of Navayana Buddhism or the Ambedkarism, the follower of Ambedkar, particularly the Navajanis. They had contributed to the growth of Navajan Buddhism. Secondly, the post-Mandal phenomenon had contributed to the growth of a new kind of identity movement in Maharashtra, particularly the certain dominant caste community, the Kamper word, to develop this sense. The MSS is one of the important part of this anti-caste movement in that area, particularly anti-Brahminism. But it has certain limitations, and how they have tried to develop the sense of new identity, or how they try to develop the sense of anti-Brahminism, that all these features have been discussed by Akshay Sawant. We'll have the question answer at the end of the session. Now I will invite Dr. Ashish Kumar. Dr. Ashish Kumar is an assistant professor of history of Punjab University, Chandigarh. He will speak on why they hate in Manu, colonial history, the Manusmriti and Dalits. All of you know that Manusmriti has accepted as the source of the caste discrimination in India, particularly because of its translation into English, as well as in when it got the codified form in the solid ground, it has accepted as a source, and how it appeared as a matter of hatred, particularly for the Dalits in the 1920s. That will be discussed by Dr. Ashish Kumar. Now I'll invite Ashish Kumar to present this paper.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, respected Chair, Professor R.K. Barman, and fellow participants. The title of my paper is Why They Hate Manu, Colonial History, the Manusmriti, and Dalit Struggle for Emancipation. The paper is divided into 4 parts. First part is Finding Manu. Second is When James Mill Met Manu. Third, Manu's Aryan Race. And fourth is Burning of Manu. So now, in recent years, events associated with the celebration of Manusmriti Dahan Divas or Manusmriti Burning Jayanti are reported from different parts of the country, including Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, Gujarat, and Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. The act of burning the Manusmriti has received worried responses from the people who either have endorsed it as an act of defiance against Brahmanism or they have condemned it as an attack on Hinduism. For the Dalits, the Manusmriti is a symbol of their hundreds of years old exploitation. But contrary to them, the same Manu, the author of Manusmriti, is also celebrated by several higher caste Hindus as a great sage who has given India its first comprehensive legal code. Owing of Manu's such a contested image, this paper aims to investigate how and why Manu, the author of Manusmriti, entered into the politico-cultural and populist domain of India's society from the custody of the priestly castes. And in the answer to this question also lies the answer to another question, which is why Dalits hate Manu. So the first section is finding Manu. In 1772, Warren Hastings, who was Governor General of Bengal from 1772 to 1785, he decided to administer Muslim law among Muslims and the Hindu Shastra among Hindus. And following it, a decision was taken to seek the aid of Brahmin intellectuals in the task of interpreting Hindu law. Unlike the European Islamic model, Hindu law was heterogeneous, polymorphic system that did not operate according to any one authoritative book. And therefore, in the absence of an adequate translation of Hindu legal text, the Dharam Shastras, British magistrates were forced to rely on the interpretations of Brahmin Pandits. While the company officials desired to stabilize their territorial authority over a foreign population with the help of the Pandits collaborated with them to retain their superior status with the support of the new ruling class. The Code of Gentoo Laws, which was published in 1776, it was prepared by Nathaniel Brassey Halhed with the help of the Pandits under the command of Warren Hastings. And when Hastings desired to make certain omissions or amendments in some passages of it to make the text fit for the European readers, Pandits refused to comply, and they asserted the sacrality of their Shastras. As Halhed had no knowledge of Sanskrit, he had entirely relied upon a group of Brahmins for the compilation and translation of the ancient laws, first into Persian and then from Persian into English. 11 Brahmins had been assembled from different parts of Bengal to Fort William in Calcutta, and here the Hindu laws were compiled and translated into Persian by these Brahmins from May 1773 to February 1775. Out of 20 texts that these Brahmins selected for the preparation of the Code of Gentoo's laws, the Manusmriti is placed at the top of the first law book of the Hindus, and also as a source of all the subsequent law books that appeared over a period of time. Interestingly, in the section Preliminary Discourse of the Code of Gentoo Laws, Brahmin compilers blamed the Muslim rulers for disrupting the judicial system of the Hindus in the medieval times. And it was described as a source of terror and confusion among the Hindus. And then they praised Warren Hastings for introducing the Hindu laws for Hindus. Once the Manusmriti was introduced as the earliest law book of the Hindus, it attracted the attention of several company officials, and one of these was William Jones. William Jones described himself as the Justinian of India and patronized the compilation of a digest of Indian law based on the Manav Dharam Shastra or Manusmriti to reconstitute the Hindu polity on the basis of ancient legal tradition of India. An English translation of the Manusmriti, titled as Institutes of Hindu Laws, was published by him in 1776. And Manu, a son or grandson of Brahma, was identified not only as the oldest but also as the holiest of legislators of the Hindus. In spite of being fascinated with the Manusmriti, even William Jones described this text as a system of despotism and priestcraft limited by law. William Jones, like several other British magistrates, wanted to move beyond any reliance on the Pandits in matters judicial or scholarly, and therefore translation of Hindu legal treatises into English was advocated by him to establish the authority of the British officials on and above all social groups in India. William Jones' The Digest of Hindu Law was a major attempt to free the Europeans from their dependence upon the native Brahmins. The initial work on the digest started under Jones, but unfortunately, he died in 1794. And after his death, the task of compiling the digest of Hindu legal code fell on the shoulders of Henry Thomas Colebrook, who completed it successfully by 1797-1798 with the publication of the first volume of Digest of Hindu Law. In this digest, several opinions, directly or indirectly relevant on a single issue, were cited from diverse Hindu texts. But the Manusmriti particularly was cited as the principal authority, and Manu was described as the first of the legislators. Now I'm moving to the second section, when James Mill met Manu. The translations that had primarily been prepared of the Hindu laws for judicial matters when reached into the hands of James Mill. He used these translations extensively to write The History of British India, which was published in 1817. This book is usually considered the hegemonic text on Indian history in the 19th century, since it was required reading at Hailbury College, where until 1855, civil servants of the East India Company were trained. It played a key role in shaping the minds and policies of the colonial officials towards India. Mill's history also contains a section of Hindu history, and the history of the Hindus, which is there in the history of British India, is narrated by identifying stages, for example, pastoral and agricultural, of developments in their social, political, and material conditions over a period of time. James Mill had adopted a utilitarian attitude to scrutinize the Hindu laws, particularly the Manusmriti, and he held that caste led to despotism in India. James Mill never visited India, nor he had any knowledge of Indian languages, and his history of British India, including a section on Hindu period, was entirely based on the secondary literature and the translations of Sanskrit texts, particularly the Manusmriti. A frequent appearance of the Manusmriti in James Mill's book, particularly in the section of Hindu history, shows the centrality of this ancient treatise in the shaping of his perspective towards India's ancient past. Following the Manusmriti, James Mill characterized the classification of ancient Indians into 4 orders or castes as the key framework of the Hindu society, not only in the ancient past but also in the 19th century. In the 4 orders or caste schema, Brahmins were identified to be the most privileged and powerful, and contrary to them, the Shudras, followed by the untouchables, the most deprived and disadvantaged in the Hindu society. The most important development that happened with the publication of Mill's history was the rejection of the divine origin of the caste system. Through his history, Mill deconstructed the sacrality of the Hindu Shastras, and at the same time, he reconstructed an image of India in which despotic rulers, the Kshatriyas, ruled the land, Brahmins enjoyed liturgical, legislative, and judicial powers, Vaishyas managed production, and the Shudras, along with the untouchables, faced the worst form of exploitation. Having characterized the Manusmriti as the most celebrated, perhaps, of the all original compends of Hindu law, James Mill conceptualized the idea of Oriental despotism, and the king was suggested to have had governed with the help of the learned Brahmins, who alone enjoyed the right to read, invent, and interpret the laws. The image of Hindu India that Mill created, based on the Manusmriti, was used by him to portray the Hindu laws not only as rude but also defective. My next section is Manu's Aryan race. The fame of Manu spread across the Europe when William Jones' English translation of Manusmriti was translated into German, French, Portuguese, and Russian in the course of the 19th century. As Manu gained wider popularity in Europe, the Manusmriti was even declared as India's greatest achievement in the field of jurisprudence by its European readers. The translation of the Manusmriti by G. Bhullar, which was published in 1886 as part of the Sacred Books of the East. So G. Bhullar's translation, in fact, connected this Manusmriti with that of the Aryan race. And on the other hand, Friedrich Nietzsche found in the Manusmriti the authoritative text of the glorious Aryan race, and the caste system was accepted to have been a mechanism that ensured the purity of Brahmins and that who represented the true Aryans. Now, James Mill's history, whereas had deprived the Varna system its divine sanctity, the race, the pseudoscience that gained wider popularity in Europe in the second half of the 19th century, not only naturalized caste, but also provided a scientific basis to it. The race science that gained wider popularity following the publication of Charles Darwin's Origin of Species in 1859 undermined the theory of monogenetic origin of humans based on biblical framework. And at the same time, it affirmed the essential unity of the human species. Following the theory of evolution, it was argued that different human races represent different stages in the linear progress of human developments. Max Muller, the German-born Indologist, connected the modern Hindus, particularly the higher caste, with that of the Aryans, who had been the authors of the Vedas. And Max Muller narrated the history of the Hindus in terms of a racial conflict between the Aryans and the non-Aryans. Following Max Muller's views, Indian elites underlined the common racial origin of the upper caste Hindus, particularly of Brahmins, and the white-skinned Europeans from the Aryans. One Keshav Chandra, who was associated with that of the Brahmo Samaj, even argued that the British rule in India had actually marked the reunion of parted cousins, the descendants of two different families of the ancient Aryan race. By the end of the 19th century, the caste race correlation was formalized through the census of India by Herbert H. Risley, according to whom in India alone, the Aryans had come into close contact with an unequivocally black race, Dravidians. And therefore, he concluded that the motive principle of Indian caste is to be sought in the antipathy of the higher race for the lower, of the fair-skinned Aryans for the black Dravidians. In a similar manner, in the Cambridge History of India, which was published in 1922 and edited by E.J. Repson, in this Cambridge History of India, caste was identified as a chief distinguishing feature of the Indian society and essentially a Brahminical institution. And its origin was traced from the racial conflicts between the Aryans and the non-Aryans. In addition, the Manusmriti, which provided the earliest information related to the intermixing of Varnas and formation of caste, is called the most important law book of the Aryans, and it has been identified as the earliest than any other Dharam Shastras. Now I'm reaching to the last section of my paper, Burning of Manu. Because by the early 20th century, we see that the connection between Aryan, Hindu, Manusmriti, and race, it was all established. Okay, so then in response to it, also the Dalit intellectuals like Jyotiba Phule and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar responded to it, and that is what the last section is, Burning of Manu. So in the year 1873 was published Jyotirao Phule's Gulamgiri, which even though reinterpreted the Hindu legends from the perspective of Shudra Atishudras, was based on the theoretical foundations provided by the colonial history of India. Not only the Aryan invasion theory, but also the racial differences between the Aryan and non-Aryans were accepted. Brahmins, whereas were projected as the descendants of the extremely cunning, arrogant, and bigoted Aryan invaders, Shudra Tishudras were identified with the non-Aryans, hardy and brave aborigines. Following the colonial writings, Phule maintained that the Aryans, to keep a better hold on the people, devised that weird system of mythology, the ordination of caste, and code of cruel and inhuman laws. He labeled the laws and ordinances embodied in the Manusmriti as cunning and in favor of Brahmins alone. In Phule's view, these laws were created to dupe the minds of the ignorant and to rivet firmly on them the chains of perpetual bondage and slavery which their Brahmins, selfishness and cunning had forged. At another place, he is called the Manusmriti as the one-sided and heartless book, which contained several selfish and torturous laws created by the Arya Brahmins to harass Shudras Atishudras. Commenting on the Manusmriti, Phule raised the question, why did this law book of Brahmins carry no mention of the English, the French, and the Europeans? In response to it, he argued that the account of the origin of human beings given by Manu is completely wrong, simply because it cannot be applied to all human beings. If it if indeed it had been created by God, then Manu would not have only talked about the Europeans, but his laws would be applicable to them too. Fuller cited the theory of the evolution of nature to disprove Manu's legend about the origin of all the four Varnas from different parts of Brahma. Fuller was aware of Charles Darwin's evolutionary theory, about which he has cited in his book Cultivator's Whipcord, which was published in 1883, to reject Manu's theory of Varna origin. Fuller questioned thus the validity of Manu's origin myth by applying common sense, reasoning, contemporary research finding of the Europeans, and it is well evident from the frequent appearance of the writings of William Jones, Max Muller, H.S. Wilson, John Wilson, and several others in the footnotes of his book Cultivator's Whipcord. Even though he learned about Manu from William Jones' translation of Manusmriti, but his critical analysis of it was entirely based on his own experiences in the Maharashtrian society of the 19th century. Now, on the other side, B.R. Ambedkar's approach was entirely different from Phule. He rejected the racial foundations of caste system, and he argued that the various races of India occupying different territories have more or less fused into one another, and therefore they all possessed a common cultural unity. For B.R. Ambedkar, Manu, the lawgiver of India, if he did exist, was certainly an audacious person. And if the story that he gave the law of caste be credited, according to Ambedkar, then Manu must have been a daredevil fellow. In his lecture, Caste in India, Their Mechanism, Genesis and Development, Ambedkar argued that neither Manu nor Brahmins and Shastras alone created the caste system. In Ambedkar's view, caste is an enclosed class. Following this dictum, he opined that the Varna divisions were based on occupation, therefore the Hindu society originally was made of four different classes: Brahmins, the priestly class; Kshatriyas, the warriors; the Vaishyas, the merchant class; and Shudras or artisanal, the menial classes. According to Ambedkar, these four classes turned into caste when Brahmins socially detached itself from the rest of the body of people and through a closed door policy became a caste by itself. And such an attitude of Brahmins impacted the other divisions of society, and they too gradually imitated the Brahmins and became self-enclosed units called caste. Even though Ambedkar didn't consider Manu as the creator of caste system, but he did identify Manu as a lawgiver who upheld an already existing caste system by philosophizing as well as codifying it. Manu had widely been recognized by the early decades of the 20th century as an Aryan lawgiver who reduced the Sudra Atishud.
Ashish, please go to your concluding part.
Yes, sir, I'm just finishing it. So Manu had widely been recognized by early decades of the 20th century as an Aryan lawgiver who reduced the Shudras Atishudras to the level of slaves of the Brahmins by codifying the caste system. The same is also evident from the resolution that were passed in the Mahad Satyagraha Conference on 25-26 December 1927. Now, one of the four resolutions that were passed in the Satyagraha proposed the burning of the Manusmriti. As a symbol of rejection of the religious basis of untouchability, the classic Hindu law book Manusmriti was burned ceremoniously at a pit dug in front of the pandal in full view of the conference. The resolution, even though was proposed by Ganadhar Nilkanta Shahasrabuddhe, a Brahmin associate of Ambedkar, but the decision to burn the Manusmriti seems to have been of Ambedkar, who along with hundreds of Dalits aimed to publicly reject the normative foundations of caste system by burning it. So it seems that this semantic expression, hate, is not a product of an undefined, irrational and incoherent emotional spurt of Dalits against Manu and his Manusmriti. Rather, this hate that Dalits expressed by burning the Manusmriti, its earliest theoretical roots are located in a well-defined colonial discourse of the late 18th and the 19th century. So Dalit, they hate Manu, they burn Manusmriti in a response to that theoretical legal system which was conceptualized in the course of the 19th century. So this is the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish, for your excellent presentation and expressing your views on the codification and Manu and its translation, how that there was the evolution of the classification of Indian population, how the colonial rule has presented Manu in the wider circle of the Western world, and how it has been opposed, or it was opposed by the uh, opponents of Manu, particularly Phule and Ambedkar, and eventually that led to the symbolic incident of burning of Manusmriti. So now I will invite the our last paper presenter of this session, Ms. Sephora Jose. Sephora, you are here. She is from the Department of Humanities and Social Science, IIT Kanpur, and she will speak on the conceptualizing Dalit historiography through the cultural productions of Dravida, Varga, Aikya, Munnani. So now it is your turn. Please take only 18 to 10, 19 minutes, not more than that. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So I would like to present using PowerPoint. So I'll share my slides. Let me know if it's visible. Um, I hope you can see the slides. Hello.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Hello. Yeah, okay. So let me start my presentation. Good morning, everyone. Gopal Guru, in one of his discussions on Dalit history and literature, mentioned about historiography as a history not written by fingers but fists. I thought the image of fists writing history is very powerful and apt, hence titled my paper, inspired from that image. The title of my presentation is When Fists Write of the Past, Conceptualizing Dalit Historiography Through the Cultural Productions of Dravida Varga Aikya Munnani. I chose this color scheme also for a specific reason. This is central to this community's politics, their anti-caste politics. Their flag, dress, worship place, etc. have this color of black and red. Black symbolizing, so it reminds us of a history of caste violence. Black symbolizing clotted blood and red symbolizing fresh blood. So Dalit historiography is the narrativization of the past from a Dalit perspective, purposive of critiquing existing traditions of Indian historiographies and producing counter-histories. It is the discourse through which historiographic erasures and misrepresentations are challenged through narratives that recover and reinterpret the past from anti-caste standpoints. This counter-discourse reorients historiography and transforms historical understandings by recognizing caste as a structuring principle of history. It's a complex and dialogic realm of mutually conversing historical narratives, which asserts history as a heterogeneous epistemic category of political valence. Central to Dalit historiographic discourse, critique and counter-creation have been articulated vis-a-vis content and methodology in history writing. The counter-narratives recover erased histories or caste-relevant themes and reinterpret the flawed or inadequate dominant historiographic representations. The methodological intervention is by foregrounding the dialecticism and non-linearity of history, exemplified through periodization and narrative style. The shift in the evidential paradigm followed in mainstream historiography also marks an epistemic intervention from an anti-caste standpoint. This paper attempts to exemplify and theorize Dalit historiography as a resistance epistemology by outlining its methodological and thematic aspects through a study of DCUF or Depressed Class United Front. It is an Adi Dravida community named Dravida Varga Aikya Munnani Malayalam that emerged as an anti-caste politico-religious group in the 1950s Kerala under the leadership of Vijay Sabharaj Tirumeni. Considering the geo-cultural location of DCUF and the specificity of Kerala's history, an understanding of mainstream Kerala historiography becomes essential to decipher the historiographical interventions of DCUF. Recognition of the regional specificity in the history of caste leads to the discovery of heterogeneity within the discourse of Dalit historiography instead of assuming the local or regional as part of the national. So we are going to look at the specificity of Kerala history. Mainstream Kerala historiography shows the agrarian expansion as a much later event
as compared to the other parts of the subcontinent. The trade-based society in Kerala moved to agriculture in the 8th century AD after the Brahmin incursions from the regions of Karnataka. Differently, mainstream nationalist and Dalit Indian historiographies present are in arrival through the lens of Desi, Videsi, and North-South respectively. Unlike in other states, when caste developed in Kerala, it did not branch out neatly based on the Varna principle. The considerable demographic proportion of the foreign traders constituted by Christians, Jews, and Muslims in Kerala who engaged in occupations related to transportation and exchange of goods altered the way caste developed in Kerala. Unlike the mainstream Indian historiography, which documents Aryan invasion of the Indus Valley and Gangetic basins, mainstream Kerala historiography presents the arrival of the Brahmins in Kerala as incursive, characterized by ideological manipulation and establishment of hegemony. Although caste-based land relations appear in mainstream Kerala historiography as general system or landlordism, caste slavery as an economic institution of exploitation and transaction of Dalit or slave castes does not appear in Indian historiography. Kerala also has a distinct history of colonial rule. Unlike many other Indian states, before its birth in 1956, Kerala was divided into three princely states, Malabar, Cochin, and Travancore. While the colonial rulers directly ruled Malabar through British residents since the late 18th century, Cochin and Travancore remained as princely states under monarchical rule till 1949. Therefore, this exemplifies the requirement to look at the regional in particular, as it is not a subset of mainstream Indian historiography. This demands to observe the mainstream historiographic trends in Kerala. The mainstream discourse of Kerala history principally manifests two trends, the political and the economic, emphasizing the structures of rule and systems of production, respectively. The political histories of Kerala elicit a paradigm that focuses on structures of power defined by ruling classes or authorities or the state. It adopts a top down perspective from locations of power. Therefore, these histories inevitably chronicle rule systems, rulers, and social classes which are part of the administrative systems. Consequently, it presents history as driven by individuals and ruling classes, systems as designed and regulated by those in power, while the people, when mentioned, appear primarily as subjects that are acted upon. As the definitional and representational criteria of community become political role and social status, those who do not wield power in the political machinery, like tribals, Dalits, and fisher folk, get ignored, sidelined, or even misrepresented as non-agentship. The mainstream historiography presents the medieval or post-Aryan era as the golden age, characterized by remarkable growth in political power, economy, art, literature, and the establishment of Hindu hegemony. Mainstream Kerala historiography presents Aryanization as a non-violent process attained primarily through Brahmin intelligence. Though caste is stated to be a determinant of social relations of power, socio-political formations like caste and class appear as depoliticized socio-cultural categories and therefore normalized and sanctioned as beneficial for socio-political stability. However, practices like agrestic slavery and untouchability are mentioned as social evils which are not under the purview of the state or politics, therefore ought to be reformed through social reform movements. The other historiographic framework in mainstream Kerala history foregrounds economic relations of production. This historiographic strand understands historical realities as rooted in economy, constituted by material conditions of production and land relations at a particular historical moment. In this framework, state power structures become reflections of the economy and its shifts. Economic history identifies society in terms of classes depending on their relationship with land and production. It reverses the historical view and sees historical changes as swelling up from the bottom, therefore offers a bottom-up historical view. The state becomes secondary in this paradigm, while the power holding structures or authorities are defined in terms of class. Economic histories add caste in the narrative as an influential factor in class formation, exemplified in the nature of property ownership, methods of resource allocation, and forms of surplus extraction. This historiographic tradition traces history in terms of the shift from tribal economy to agriculture and the later shift to trade and cash cropping in the colonial capitalist economy. Caste is seen to originate in the agrarian phase, marked by new rigid land relations and particular labor systems to maximize production. Such economic histories project the relationship with land as the determining criterion of the socio-economic identity of individuals and groups. Though Jadi is added in the narrative wherever it is seen to be relevant, the narrative revolves around the relationship between social classes determined by their position in the production process. The representation of slavery is a significant aspect in mainstream historiography vis-a-vis caste. Caste-based slavery is repeatedly recognized as an exploitative order from which landowning classes benefited. The focus on deprivation of the slaves reduced the history of slave upheavals to mass Dalit conversions to Christianity or an absolute denial of slave resistance. The term slavery is interchangeably used with the words bonded labor and servitude, blurring not just the transactional aspect of slavery but also its caste determinacy. The periodization adopted in political historiography of Kerala aligns with the state-centric framework that chronicles the reigns of various structures of state. The dominant pattern of periodization divides the long time span into the period of Sangh era, Aryanization, the development of kingdoms, the growth of colonial powers, and the nationalist call for an independent nation state, reaffirming the meta-narrative of the state. The periodization in economic histories shows its goal to articulate the decisiveness of economic changes in history. The historical junctures that mark different economic configurations are identified as pre-feudal or tribal, feudal, colonial, and capitalist, the nationalist. In this periodization paradigm, history is understood in terms of economic changes, where caste appears merely as an additive factor. The evidential paradigm is also an important aspect in historiography. As a mode of knowledge generation, historiographic methodology is embedded within dominant epistemic values. Mainstream Kerala historiography resorts exclusively to official artifacts, written documents, and hegemonic literature for discovering historical facts in writing history. History is a significant category with which DCUF, the Adi-Dravida community, which engages as part of its anti-caste politics, through the analysis of their cultural texts and trying to show their epistemic or historiographic interventions. The anti-caste politics of DCUF historiography primarily highlights the Brahminical erasure of their Dravidian history and Adi-Dravida identity as the indigenous people. They critique mainstream historiographies for erasing their Dravidian royal legacy as the descendants of benevolent and just kings of Chera, Chola, and Pandya dynasties. DCUF also criticizes the state for partaking in historiographic erasures by preserving the history of caste elites. One among Sabharaj's, the founder's disciples, Isaac Manjadikeri, in one of his poems, criticizes the state for issuing postal stamps in the name of St. Thomas, who is believed to have professed Christianity to the caste Christians or Syrian Christians, who are also called as Nambudiri Christians in Kerala. They criticize the state for privileging certain historical figures and events and ignoring certain others. The erasure of anti-caste resistance from history is also contended in the historiographic discourse of DCUF. The general absence of Dalit and lower caste struggles and their leaders, or their infrequent appearance in history, is questioned. Critique of historiographic misrepresentation as manifested in the cultural archive of DCUF questions Brahminical myths which validate Brahmin superiority in history. The recurring presence of the Parashura myth in history, for example, is critiqued for sanctioning and legitimizing the Brahmin ownership of land. DCF also problematizes the representation of caste slavery in history. Unlike the mainstream historiography, which presents slavery merely as an economic institution, they problematize this historiographic representation for being historically unjust, reinstating the Savarna imagination of the lower castes as poor and broken by masking their original glory as the native royal tribe, who were cheated and enslaved despite their generosity to the Aryan invaders. Mainstream Kerala historiography presents the Renaissance in Kerala as a continuous and homogeneous project of social reform initiated by various upper caste, lower caste, and Dalit leaders. DCUF is critical of such representation, which denies the distinctiveness of different caste communities' experience of modernity. Their critique extends to the homogenization of the emancipatory visions of lower caste like Iravas and ex-untouchable castes as belonging to the same anti-caste tradition. Now we look at the historiographic counter-narratives of DCUF created through recovery of erased histories and reinterpretation of specific historical events and experiences. DCUF recovers the Dravidians' indigenous history by highlighting their epistemic superiority, material prosperity, and glory in terms of social standing. They posit a glorious history of royal legacy by characterizing Dalits as descendants of the Dravidian tribal dynasties, namely Chera, Chola, and Pandya. They also reclaim their philosophic knowledge tradition, seen to be manifested in their own Vedas and Shastras, which valorize equality and justice as pride. These year cultural productions highlight the material prosperity of the Adi Dravida by claiming that many shrines or cows were owned by the natives, which were later Brahminized in the post Aryan period. The recovery of Dravidian myths and their inclusion into history also form part of their recovery project. Their cultural productions reveal the community's celebratory approach to their Adi Dravidian history and culture. The recovery of Dravidian.
Please go to your concluding part. Okay.
Okay. The recovery. The text also narrativized the history of native tribes' enslavement under the Brahminic Aryan regime as a counter to the mainstream historiographic projection of the slave status. So they mark a movement from the status of slave to the enslaved, marking the experiential worlds of caste slavery, which is erased in the mainstream historiography. The methodological intervention in historiography can be understood vis-a-vis the evidential paradigm and periodization. Their addition of non-conventional historical texts like myths, oral literature, and legends, along with official written text, can be understood as an epistemic expansionist epistemic intervention. The periodization into indigenous times, Aryanization, Janvi system, colonial modernity and renaissance, anti-caste movements shows caste as the structuring principle in history. To conclude, Dalit historiography is an effective medium to articulate resistance against caste. It can be theorized as a counter epistemology against caste, which primarily elicits aspects of critique and counter creation. To use Gopal Guru's words, Dalit historiography serves the purpose of pedagogic epistemology oriented towards political action. It transforms the understanding of history by keeping caste as the central question and articulates counter histories from anti caste positions. DCUF's anti-caste politics vis-a-vis historiography foregrounds their histories of indigeneity and enslavement through a creative and critical engagement with mainstream historiographic paradigms at the national and regional levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Sephora, for your excellent presentation on one important issue of historical writing. You have used the term called the mainstream historiography and the marginal people. You'll find that there has always been a kind of politics of denial, that not to accept or not to present the voice of the marginal people in the mainstream historiography. If you go to the history of our colonial period, then the voices of the marginal people have been presented in such a way that would be appeared as the side effects of the colonial rule in most cases. So, in the regional level, in almost all regions of India, the nationalist historiography or the mainstream historiography have sadly neglected the views or the voices of the marginal people. So, uh, as I told you at the beginning, that in the 1990s there was a kind of voice that there should be an attempt to create an alternative discourse to present the Dalit views on the Dalit historiography, and that would be not the question of the oppression, but to raise the voice of protest. So this is an excellent presentation, and now we have completed the presentation part, and we have four papers. Now these papers are open to the audience for any queries or the pertinent questions or any opinions or observations. And those who have any questions, please write in the chat box, or you can ask directly also. So I have not received any questions so far. There is no question so far. So this is a problem in the online mode of presentation, because many of the audience participants are not in a position to send the question because of the problem of network, or sometimes they, yes. Uh, okay, this is not a question, but this is a request to Sephora. Gyajendran Ayuthurai, she will contact you anyway. If any specific question from the audience? Okay, I think so far there is no question.
Sir, we have a question. We are just typing it out in the chat box.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, one question is there. Akshay Sawant, the question is to Venna, that how was the Youth League of Ambedkarites activities were shaped in Marthawada? This question is from Akshay Sawant to Venna. Venna.
Yes, sir. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, 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 Abhilash.
Yes. Akshay, the thing is, the activities of the Youth League of Ambedkarites, especially after the formation of the Hyderabad State Depressed Classes Association, was very active in the Marathwada region. This can be seen from the tours made by B.S. Venkatrao and Shyam Sundar in the Marathwada region, and mostly the HS, which is the Hyderabad State Depressed Classes Association's influence, was more visible from 1939 in the Marathwada region rather than in the Telangana region. So, and especially this is seen from the subsequent events where the Dalit masses responded more to the Depressed Classes Association, more in the Marathwada than in Telangana. And the 1942 Parbani Conference held in Marathwada shows the height of the influence of HSDCA in this region. And though conversions seems to be a little less in the Marathwada region, but politically they were more influential because of their link to Ambedkarite politics. And Marathwada being closer to the Bombay Presidency showed this influence much more than other regions.
Okay, thank you. There is a question to Sephora Josh. That question is forwarded by Meghamala on behalf of the audience. The question is, how can we define community alternative to the mainstream narrative of socio-political status and production relation? This is for this question is for Sephora Josh. Sephora, you are here.
Yes, sir. I'm just reading the question. Uh, yeah, yeah. So, um, yeah. So the main, as I said, Dalit historiography, as articulated by DCF, or Dalit historiography as a discourse, is in response to is a counter epistemic response to the mainstream historiography. So what I was doing, I tried to look at the mainstream historiographic trends, and I identified two kinds, which foreground the political structures as well as economic structures. So DCF's historiography or Dalit historiography is different from these two historiographic paradigms because Dalit historiography transforms historical understandings by placing caste as the structuring principle, and therefore an alternate historiographic view is produced. So, so in that case, since caste, it pertains to economic relations, social relations, ideological aspects, etc., the aspect Dalit historiography of DCUF also reflects all these aspects. Specifically, since you asked about collective memory, the memory is a very important source which Dalit communities like the Dravida DCF community which uses in historiography. When you asked about collective memory, this specifically it came to my mind about the history of slavery and Adi Dravida culture which they project. Specifically, the history of enslavement. To give you just an example, that the history of enslavement. History, as presented in mainstream historiography, is an economic institution where it is just an economic institution where the landowning classes exploit the lower castes and Dalits. But when it comes to the community, the Dalit historiography of the community, we see there is a shift from the economic aspects to the experiential aspects. So if I did this work primarily through field work. So when I went to the community, when I talked to people, they articulated their very powerful memories and the memories which transmit over generations through their oral literature and other cultural symbols. If you remember, I have put some of them in pictures in the slides. So memory is a very powerful, and aspect of their historiography. They preserve their history through memory as well as they transmit or keep it alive through memory, through collective memory. And this collective memory is politically also significant. It is historiographically significant, and therefore it translates to political significance because it is very pedagogic that they're always united and organized based on this collective memory of oppression and dehumanization, which therefore invokes a feeling, a sensation of protest and anger, which is very constructive in the political aspect of it. So that is my answer.
Okay, Sephora, there is another question for you on that is by Hiranna Mukherjee. Hiranna Mukherjee has raised a question to Sephora that could you briefly comment, if possible, on the interactions between linear hegemonic history of normative culture and intra-caste kinship relations within Dalit communities? If possible, you comment briefly, then we'll go for the concluding part.
Yeah. Mm, like, I really did not understand exactly the point of intra-caste kinship relations in historiography, since I did not really mention anything of that. But considering the aspect you raised,
Actually, the question is something like that. So, is there any intra-caste or inter-caste problem relating to the presentation or representation of the history of the indigenous people of Kerala? Because there are many communities.
okay. Yeah, so when we look at the history of this particular community, I have not included this aspect in the presentation because in presentation is like just 20 minutes. So if you look at the history of this community, uh, these people, they primarily now, they claim themselves to be the Adi Dravidas, but if you look at their history, they have been part of Christianity for some time during the colonial period, and because they faced discrimination in Christianity, they broke away from Christianity and formed their own community, which is Dravida Varga Aikya Munnani. Later they have a faction called Devajana Samajam, which is a religious group or a religious faction of this particular group. And it's very complex dynamics, and it's very interesting also that this community has uh, connections with various other Dalit communities or lower caste communities who were also part of Christianity for some time. And so, to put it very crudely, you can say that this works as a Dalit religion. And if you look at the Dalit religious history of this group, it has broken away from other Dalit religions. And I don't know if I sound too complicated, but
Anyway, we can discuss it when
yeah,
we'll have
and
time.
regarding just the linearity aspect also, this seeing caste from perspective, history from the perspective of caste, history becomes a very dialogic realm of various competing narratives and historical events. So, unlike mainstream historiography, which believes in a very progressive narrative of history, Dalit historiography counters this understanding by giving a more complex picture of dialogic struggles.
Okay, thank you, Sephora. Meghavala, is there any other question? Okay, I think there is no more question.
No, sir, that was all.
Okay, so now it is my turn to summarize the whole presentation here. So, though the most of the paper presenters have presented or expressed their views in regards to their paper, only as the chairman, I have to make some points or the comments on this presentation. The presentation.
No, sir, there are no further questions.
Yeah. Actually, I am going for the summary concluding part. That is my own observation on this particular session.
Absolutely, sir. Yeah, we have
Yeah,
5 minutes left. Yeah, sure.
So we have 5 minutes in our hand. The four papers, all the papers are very much thought-provoking because all of them have adapted new approaches to look into the old issues. The first paper that is relating to the induction of the Yeola conference of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar regarding the conversion of the untouchable to non-Hindu religious faith. When he said that I am born as an untouchable Hindu, but I would not continue this kind of fold in future. So, in case of Hyderabad, that is the Nizam Shahi or the state ruled by Nizam ul Mulk, there was a kind of induction or the influence, there was the growth of conversion to Christianity and Islam. But I would suggest Venna Abhilash to read very carefully the writings of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the article that is called the Waiting for a Visa. The Waiting for a Visa is a very, very significant, thought-provoking writing of Dr. Ambedkar, where he has stated that I would give a few examples to show that an untouchable is an untouchable to a Hindu, an untouchable is an equally untouchable to a Muhammadan, an untouchable is an untouchable to a Persian. So he has given one example that how he was treated in Nizam state, that he has categorically mentioned the incident that how he was treated by the Muslims of the state. So when you will present this kind of presentation that its influence, we have to look into the other developments also in order to make the paper more authentic and more acceptable. Anyway, it is a very good paper. I think that part is less discussed in the domain of Dalit history because it was not directly ruled by the British in the colonial period. So that part has less discussed in the mainstream history, even in the mainstream Dalit historiography. So this is a new edition to understand the influence of Ambedkar on Ambedkarism and his call or his voices in a native state like or the princely state like the Hyderabad. Then the paper that is relating to the Maratha Seva Sangh MSS. This is also an excellent one because Maharashtra is such a region of India, though it was called the Bombay province, very big in terms of its territory. It was comprising not only the present-day Maharashtra and Gujarat, but also parts of some Pakistan, including the Sindh region. So it's a very big province, and in this very big province, that is full with diversity of population. There are different kind of communities. If you go to the Sindh region of Pakistan of present day, then you'll find huge concentration of the Dalits, in particular Shin province of Pakistan. So in Bombay province, that is or that was a very big province and full with different kind of problems and the social competition. Here we have found Dr. Ambedkar has was appeared as the great leader of the Dalit emancipation. Then when he has converted himself to Buddha. That is, I mean, Buddhism. This is a new development for the Dalit movement in Maharashtra itself and for entire country. Well, he converted not only into Buddhism, also he propagated a new brand of Buddhism called the Navajana Buddhism or Ambedkarite Buddhism. So this is not only a new one, though he was criticized by by many theoreticians of the traditional Buddhist, but it is a fact. It is a fact that the Navayana Buddhists are the 30% of the total Buddhist of South Asia. Try to imagine. The Navajan Buddhists are 31% of the total Buddhist population of South Asian countries, including Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, and Sri Lanka and Pakistan. So, can you imagine the 30% follower of Buddhism of South Asia are the follower of Dr. Ambedkar? So, it has a different kind of impact, not only in Maharashtra, but also for entire South Asia, including from Nepal to Sri Lanka. So now the next part, that in Indian history, there was the growth of a kind of movement. That movement is called for backwardness. When the first Backward Classes Commission was appointed in 1953 under the leadership of Kaka Sahib Khalilkar, that had presented the report or submitted the report in 1955, but it was not discussed in the parliament. Again, when the second Backward Classes Commission was appointed in 1978, we have found that it submitted its report by 1980, but again it was not discussed. But within a period of 10 years, certain parts or the recommendation of the Mandal Commission were implemented in the central government jobs, and later it was implemented in different provinces, or that is different states. And that led to the growth of a new kind of social movement in Maharashtra, particularly in the form of anti-Brahmanism, though it was full with contradiction. And all these contradictions and the problems or the demerits have been discussed by Mr. Akshay. So this is also an excellent contribution for understanding anti-casteism history or anti-casteist history of Indian subcontinent. The
So,
third, that is
sorry
Dr.
to
by
interrupt
Dr.
you,
Ashish
but
Kumar.
our time is over
Ah.
and we have our next session in 5 minutes. So if you could please wrap up.
Okay, well, I'll take 2 minutes. So the third paper, that is by Dr. Ashish Kumar. It can be discussed in details later on because we do not have enough time here. But we have, it is an important one because colonial rule had presented the Manusmriti in wider scale, and that had created a kind of opposition among the Dalit intellectuals. But we have to take into mind that the literacy rate was extremely low. So here again you will find a kind of great man versus follower, a kind of contradiction that may be discussed later on. So now fourth presentation by Sephora Jose, that is also an excellent one because she tried to present the history writings of the marginal people as an alternative to counter the mainstream historiography. And this counter, in order to counter, she has tried to elaborate on the or emphasize on the kind of methodology. And if we take into this kind of thing with a proper methodology, so it can be accepted in future as a new perspective for writing the Dalit historiography. So with all these comments, I would like to stop here. And